If you're thinking about buying this, the Canon RF 200-800mm lens, or perhaps upgrading from the Canon RF 100-500mm lens, or perhaps even just looking at buying either of these two lenses and you're not sure which one to buy, then stick around because I think this video will be of help to you. So I've just taken delivery of the RF 200-800mm lens, which I pre-ordered on announcement day. It's taken a couple of months to arrive, but it's here now. So what I'm going to do is take a look at it and give you my thoughts on it. The first thing to say is I'm coming at this from an amateur hobbyist wildlife photographer perspective, which is what I would call myself. This is a lens which I purchased with my own money, and hopefully after I've taken a look at it, I'll be able to give you my thoughts, and it will help you make a more informed decision on whether you think it might be the right lens for you or not. In keeping with my previous videos, the first thing I'm going to do is unbox this. The lens arrived a couple of days ago. I'm absolutely itching to see what's inside the box. I haven't yet opened it, so we'll do that together for the first time. I'm then going to go and take the lens out into the field, and by that I mean literally a field for a real field test, and then give you my thoughts on it. I will be splitting this video into some chapters, the details of which you will find in the description below. You can also scroll along the bottom of the video so you can skip ahead to the sections that you find relevant, or easily jump back to sections that you want to review again. All the timestamps are listed in the description below. So after I've unboxed the lens, I'll go for the real field test. I will look at the autofocus speed, the autofocus accuracy, how the lens performs on both a full frame Canon sensor and an APS-C Canon sensor. For that I'll be using my R6 and my R7. I'll also be looking at the 100-500mm and making some comparisons where relevant for this lens, and answering questions such as, is this a lens which you can actually use in low light given the high ISO capabilities of today's cameras? Also, how does this particular lens compare with the 100-500mm lens with a 1.4 teleconverter on? Are you perhaps better off just sticking with the 100-500mm if you already own one and putting a teleconverter on there? Hopefully I'll be able to look into that and give you some further thoughts. And finally, I'll be comparing images that I've previously taken on the 100-500mm lens against the images that I'm taking on the 200-800mm lens. We'll look at images side by side in Lightroom and see if we can see any differences in sharpness and overall image quality. Right, just before we get into the unboxing, it might be worthwhile comparing the specifications of the 200-800 against the 100-500mm lens. So I'll pop that on screen for you now, side by side. Do feel free to pause the video here so you can study the specifications in your own time, and then we'll get on with the unboxing. Okay, so here's the box. As per usual, no seal on this box. This is the fourth thing I bought from Canon which hasn't had a seal on. I just presume they just don't seal their products, but this has not yet been unboxed thus far. So let's have a look at what's inside. Excuse the plaster on my hand. I managed to burn myself somehow, and I've got a bit of a blister which is recovering, so I thought I'd cover it up with a plaster. Inside the box then, first thing is some paperwork's fallen out. So what have we got here? We have got a warranty piece of information and what looks like instruction sheet, instruction booklet. I wouldn't really call it a booklet, more of a folded bit of paper. So move this to one side, plastic lid. Oh, and then inside another box, and a box inside a box. I wasn't expecting that. In fact, just before I tackle what's inside this box, which has come out of the box, the box inside a box, just to show you in here, there was another plastic tray right at the very bottom. That box is now completely empty. So two plastic trays to make a bigger box than is really needed, which I've got to say, from Canon's perspective, surely it's just a waste of packaging. Surely if you're Canon, you could get rid of these two bits of plastic and the larger box and just have this as the main box. It's much smaller, much more compact, less packaging, less wastage, and you'd have thought from their point of view, easier to transport as well. So I wasn't expecting to have to use scissors, so I've just had to go and find some. So we're just going to slot this open with a pair of scissors. or slit this open, I should say. Don't really want to risk cutting anything inside here, so I've got to be really careful. There we go. And let's have a look at what we've got inside the box. We have a strap, which I'm probably never going to use, but never mind, strap. And the lens itself in some see-through, or in a see-through bag. So let's get this lens out of the bag and see what we've got. Lens itself. And the lens hood. So that's pretty much what you get in the box. I'm a little bit surprised, if I'm completely honest with you. I would have thought there'd probably be a bag, I mean a proper dedicated lens bag, protective bag in with this particular lens. Certainly the 100-500mm lens came in with one, this hasn't. That said, we've got to bear in mind that officially this is not a Canon L lens. I believe from what I've read from the announcements, this is a white lens. The white is purely there to try and reflect the heat in hot environments. For example, if you're using it for, I don't know, in Africa for wildlife safaris, etc. I'm not sure whether that's really completely necessary. I mean, I don't believe Nikon, for example, or Nikon make their lenses white. I would certainly much more prefer them to be in black or a more neutral colour. So yeah, no lens bag. I'll look at the lens strap anyway, as we've got it here. Pretty standard. I mean, it's, apart from the red stitching, it's identical to what you would find in a DSLR. It's very much a DSLR lens strap with slightly different colours. Let's have a look at this lens. So what have we got here? A smooth and tight ring. So let's move that to smooth. Unwind this. In fact, I might turn this around the other way around. Feels all right if I put it fully tight. So first thing to say is fully tight versus fully smooth. There's a slight difference, but not a lot. That's pretty much useless, I'd say. That's my first impression on this smooth and tight ring. If I make it fully tight, and then try and give it a shake. Let's see if we can get the lens creeping. Bit of a shake there. It's not creeping fully tight. Fully smooth. Fully smooth, you can see it is starting to creep. So yeah, I mean, that does work in terms of stopping the lens creep. At least it does right now. Whether or not it will further down the line if the lens loosens up, I don't know. But for now, yeah, the smooth and tight ring does work in terms of stopping lens creep. But I think that smooth and tight ring should really be more tight on fully tight than it is. So we have buttons here, image stabilizer on or off, and autofocus or manual focus control, and this button here, which I have to confess, at the moment I don't yet know what it does. So I will find out and let you know. Tripod collar, which you can loosen. But by the looks of it, not remove. So the tripod foot, tripod collar, tripod foot is permanent. Otherwise, it has very much the same kind of immediate look and feel, I'd argue probably outer build quality of the 100-500mm lens. Lens foot itself couple of different size holes for mounting different size threads or heads. No Arca Swiss built into this foot. I would really like to see that, an Arca Swiss mount built into the foot, but I don't think Canon ever do. Back of the lens, you can see 200-800mm just here, printed. On the front of the lens, if I remove the glass element, oh, there is no printing on the edge of the glass here. I would have expected to have seen something, but there isn't any. In fact, there's a little bit of dust on that front of that element of that lens. I should say dust on that element of that lens. That is outer dust, not dust inside the lens. On the back of this lens cap, which is pretty thick, there is the stamp of 95mm, so you can see for certain that this takes 95mm filters if you ever want to put one on, and you can see in there, or I hope you can, that there's a screw thread for putting on filters. Side of the lens says Canon lens RF 200-800mm f6.3 to f9. So this is at its widest point, an f6.3 lens, and fully zoomed in to 800mm will be f9. What I would do is I will pop the different zoom distances along with the minimum apertures at each of those, or maximum apertures I should say, at each of those different zoom distances, so you can try and compare that with the 100-500mm so that where the two lenses cross over, you can understand what your f-stop will be at similar focal ranges. Minimum focus distances on this lens are showing as at the wide end 0.8 meters or 2.62 feet, and at the fully telephoto end 3.3 meters or 10.83 feet. If you want to compare that to the 100-500mm, then just jump back into this video and have a look at the spec sheet that I've already put on screen. One other thing I have noticed is that there's actually two buttons on this lens, one here just above the autofocus and manual focus switch, and another one on the top here. So, as I say, what both of those buttons do, I don't know, but I'll find out and let you know. So I'm now just going to go and place this lens on the desk next to the 100-500mm with both of these lenses fully wound in, so you can just get a sense of scale as to how big this lens is, or how much larger it is, and what extra sort of size you might need in your camera bag. You will find the dimensions of both of these lenses, both fully extended and fully wound in, again on the specification sheet that I've already posted. If you scroll back along the video line, you will find that there is a chapter marking the specification sheet. So yeah, there's the lens. A couple of surprises. So the first surprise being that there was no padded lens bag included with this lens. For this type of lens and this type of price, I would have expected one, to be quite honest with you. Although I don't tend to use the lens bags myself in transport, I think that they are kind of, I would argue, almost expected really. I know this isn't an L lens, but without the red stripe on it, for me, the build quality, the size, everything else, and the price would indicate that it's pushing that way. So I would have thought Canon could have included a bag there perhaps. Another surprise for me is that the lens on the flip side, if it's not an L lens, comes with a lens hood, which is pretty much a first for Canon, if this isn't an L lens, to include a hood. So there you go. Oh, I am just going to check the other side of this lens here to see if I can find any evidence of, yes, you may not see this on camera, but around here there is a rubber ring, a rubber sealing gasket ring. So the lens has some weather sealing, which is great. And here I'm going to attach a 1.4 teleconverter to the lens just to check that it will fit okay and give me the full zoom range of the lens. On the 100-500mm, the problem we had is that you could only zoom out to 300mm as your minimum distance because the lens barrel would hit the teleconverter. But I can see on this lens it went straight in. It's fully zoomed in at zoomed out at 200mm, as you can see from the marker here. And if I zoom it out all the way to 800 there, that's fine. No catching, no knocking. This teleconverter fits for 200mm, so there's an obvious advantage there straight away. You cannot get 200mm with a teleconverter on the 100 to 500. It's just impossible. At least with the Mark 1 1.4 teleconverter. Whether or not there'll be other teleconverters in the future which will allow you to do that, I don't know. But as it stands today, filming in January 2024 of the two wildlife lenses, I'm going to call them both wildlife lenses. The 100 to 500mm will not allow you to go to 200mm with a 1.4 teleconverter. Right, well, let's go and take this into the field and see what pictures we can get and see how it compares to the RF 100 to 500mm. Right, well, here comes the first of the field tests. I guess the low light test. I've come out nice and early to see if I can photograph some owls. I know there are barn owls and shorted owls at the moment where I've come, and I very much hope that we might be lucky. So I'm up before sunrise, and hopefully as the sun starts to come up we can start to get some photography. One thing I do know already is that I have had a quick test yesterday evening actually in low light, and I did find initially that the lens was struggling to focus on the darker birds, shorted owls in low light, whereas the brighter birds such as barn owls, it was picking up very easy actually, and in fact incredibly low light, and was able to focus better in lower light on the white barn owls than it was in slightly brighter light on the darker subjects. So that's something to bear in mind. The subject that you are photographing will impact how well the lens performs. So I'm about to head out into the field. I certainly don't want to be talking out there whilst I'm photographing wildlife. It's absolutely silent here outside, so I don't want to break that peace and put the wildlife off. So I'll take some photos and I will let you know how I get on. Okay, so it's a week later, and as you can see, it's a pretty dull, grey, miserable day. In fact, it's over an hour after the sun has risen this morning. I've come here today because I didn't get any pictures last time, unfortunately. The wildlife just didn't show. Fortunately, the wildlife has shown itself today in the form of shorted owls, and yes, I have managed to get some pictures. But the one thing I did want to flag is that on days like this, in my opinion, this 200 to 800mm lens is not the right lens to bring. It's just too dark f9. The ISO for me has been sky high, pretty much maxed out at 25-600, which is where I set my limit, knowing that I can denoise images up to that point. Afterwards, with the Canon R6 Mark I full frame, and in order to try and at least get some kind of exposure, I'm using crazy shutter speeds as low as 250th of a second just after sunrise, obviously increasing that when I can. And, you know, it's a trade-off, you know. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of this lens. So to answer the question, would I recommend this lens for low light photography? Well, no, unfortunately. Now, bear in mind that we're in winter in the UK. It's a dull, grey, miserable day. Fairly typical morning, to be honest with you, for much of the UK during the year. If this morning was a sunny morning with a nice golden sunrise, which perhaps could light the subject, then I might be saying otherwise. But certainly for conditions like this, I think this is a lens you probably want to leave at home. I'm at a different location in Salisbury Plain, and I'm hopeful that, you know, we'll get some luck. I mean, you never know with these things. All I've done is try to read the lay of the land, look for the right habitat, keep an eye on the weather, and hope for the best, really. Tuck myself up behind a tree, try and blend in a bit better, and be as discreet as possible. So So very early in the afternoon, it's just gone 3 o'clock. I'm not really expecting any owls to show until probably another hour or so if they do. But that said, what we have had are a few birds of prey overhead, and it's given me a chance to test the focusing of the lens in what I would call good light. So had a red kite come in, not particularly close, but you know, this is an 800mm lens, so the reach was adequate, I'd say, for it. From my perspective, the focus tracking looked through the viewfinder to be very, very accurate, very, very speedy, very, very snappy. When I compare that to the 100 to 500mm L lens, which I've also used, at the moment in good light, I can't really tell the difference in focus speed in real world use. I'm sure there probably is a difference for a start. This lens here has a lot bigger range to focus from, and I believe the 100 to 500mm lens has dual focusing motors in this, whether I think this one has just the one, but in fact I'll confirm that on screen for you when I get back home. But so far, in good light, bird in flight, no issues at all. I'm just going to jump in here and clarify that last point. So it's nearly 6 months later, and I've now had the chance to use both of these lenses side by side whilst testing in a couple of different hides. And I can say now with certainty that when you compare these two lenses side by side, the 100 to 500mm is a faster lens than the 200 to 800mm. Even with the teleconverter on this 100 to 500, it is still a faster lens. Now, whether that's because the 100 to 500 has two focusing motors in it versus the one on the 200 to 800, or whether it's because the focusing zoom range that it has to undertake is far less, I don't know, or perhaps it's a combination of both or something else. But yes, this one is faster. However, it's only noticeable when you use them side by side. My existing point that I made nearly 6 months ago still stands. If you're using the 200 to 800mm lens on its own outside, then I can't see you're going to encounter any kind of noticeable problem in terms of speed of focus given what it offers you. So with all that said, let's jump now back to the past and continue on with the review. The challenge is going to be when the light level drops and we're dealing with darker subjects that are moving in low light, and that's hopefully what I'm going to be able to test out for you later on today. So this red kite was the only wildlife I was able to get that day, but as I packed up and started walking back to the car, having lost the light for photography, two short owls suddenly appeared around me, quartering the surrounding fields. It's always the way, isn't it? So I went back a week later, and then whilst walking from the car to the place you just saw me at in the video, I was completely caught out by surprise to see a short-eared owl out hunting already at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, whilst that's not unheard of, it's quite a bit earlier than I would normally expect to see them out in that particular area. So I decided to try and grab that opportunity while it was there and just focus entirely on my photography rather than trying to film pieces of camera. So that's why I'm doing a voiceover right now on this piece. So initially the owl was quite far away, so I took the opportunity to mount the lens to the Canon R7 in order to get me the extra 1.6 times reach or crop. Just so you know, I did not use a teleconverter for any of this footage or any of the photos which you're about to see. So this initial footage that you're seeing now was actually filmed with the R7 and the 200 to 800mm lens. So eventually I was able to get some closer shots of the owl as its hunting pattern changed and moved a little closer towards me. Now this was my first time using the lens with the Canon R7, and straight away I noticed that compared to the full frame Canon R6, the APS-C crop sensor of the Canon R7 was making it much harder to continue tracking the bird compared to its full frame bigger brother. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a problem or a fault with this particular lens on the Canon R7. In fact, I'd suggest it's very much not a fault with this particular lens, because this is something that I've encountered on the R7 as a whole. No matter what lens I put on it, especially when it comes to photography in low light situations, so that's especially the case with owls, the full frame sensor of the Canon R6 always outperforms the smaller sensor of the R7 from a focusing perspective. And I'm not just talking about low light performance in images, I'm talking about focusing. Even though the R7 has the newer focusing system borrowed from it, the flagship R3. But in my experience, it simply cannot match the performance of the bigger sensor of the R6. Now, I don't have hands-on experience of the other Canon APS-C cameras out there, but the R7 specifically, at the time of filming, I would argue is their flagship APS-C camera model. And so I suspect that this focusing issue is probably going to be replicated in the other models too. Now, I strongly suspect that's probably down to the small sensor size, At the end of the day, cameras need light to focus, and I think full frame cameras provide around about a third extra light over an APS-C camera, which is quite a lot. So here we have a relatively close shot taken on the Canon R7. In fact, it's part of a burst of shots, and as you can see, none of them have come out quite as sharp as I'd like, and I wouldn't really describe them as sharp at all, really. And yes, I have picked some of the more extreme ones to demonstrate at this point here. But you can see it's just not quite nailed the focus as sharply as my Canon R6 would have done. And in fact, we'll look at some examples of that later on in the video. But it's not a complete write-off. You will get sharp shots, okay? But your sharp to soft shot ratio is much more pronounced using the R7, obviously by having more softer shots. So you basically just need to take a lot more shots in order to pull out the sharp ones with the R7. Another thing to mention is that when the bird or subject is very close to a cluttered background and has a similar color or contrast to that background, even though it may be moving itself, the R7 really struggles to separate the subject from that background. Don't get me wrong, at times so does the Canon R6, but it's again much more noticeable on the Canon R7. Another thing to mention as well is that whilst you're also of course getting that 1.6 times boost in reach or crop factor, your aperture or f-stop on the back of your camera is also multiplied by 1.6, meaning that whilst you might see f9 on the back of your Canon R7, in reality what you're shooting at is somewhere around f14, and of course that means a lot more of your image background will remain in focus compared to a full frame camera, and you'll also be gathering less light, so your ISO digital noise will have to be a bit higher. Now, I've used the Canon R7 and this lens quite a lot since filming these particular scenes. The question is the lens usable with a crop sensor camera, and should you consider purchasing it for a crop sensor camera? So that's in fact a very difficult question to answer, because of course, yes, you can use it with a crop sensor camera, at least from a technical standpoint. The question you have to ask yourself is in what types of conditions you're going to be shooting, and perhaps, will you be shooting fast moving subjects where you need higher shutter speeds? Will those subjects be stationary where you can drop those shutter speeds to let in more light? And crucially, on the R7, give the camera more time and opportunity to focus and nail that focus. For example, whilst sat quietly waiting for owls to return, two wild fallow deer came running up towards me. Now, I had no idea I was there until they got very close and slightly downwind of me, and then I could see they became a little bit twitchy and sort of knew that I was there, or that something was there, or something was around there, but they hadn't quite made out that I was actually sat there. So in situations like this, where the subjects are not moving quickly and you can drop to slower shutter speeds, I think this would be fine for the R7 and this lens, because you have much slower shutter speeds to let in more light, and crucially, from the subject not moving fast, much more time for your camera to nail focus. With this particular video footage, if you're interested, it was filmed at maximum zoom, that's 800mm on the lens, with the 1.6 times crop of the R7, of course, meaning that the real reach would have been 1,280mm, which is a little insane. And in fact, I would like to have zoomed out to get more of the deer in the frame, but they were so close that I dare not move for fear of scaring them off. So this video is actually much more zoomed in than I'd ideally like. I think where you live and use the lens will also be a factor as well. For example, if you're in the UK, where we don't always get many bright days, especially in the winter months, and you want to use this lens for wildlife photography and you have to go early morning or late evening to sunset, my initial thoughts are the R7 and this lens are probably not the best choice or combo, in all honesty. At the end of the day, it all comes down to personal preference, but I would rather have a cleaner shot from further away, taken with a full frame camera with better focus, than a slightly blurrier close-up shot with more noise. Of course, that's just my personal choice. You may think or prefer otherwise. And perhaps everything I've just said around the R7 focusing can be demonstrated by the fact that for the final hour before sunset, even though the owls at the time were quite some distance from me, I made the decision to swap to the Canon R6 so that I could focus better. And I'm very glad I did, because even though I was not close up, whilst filming a video of a short-haired owl having just caught its dinner, I was able to capture footage of it being attacked by this kestrel for the prey it had just caught, and I was able to track and keep in focus the kestrel in a very fast dive in order to catch the falling prey that had been knocked out from the owl's talons. Now, I'm pretty sure that if I was filming this on the R7, I wouldn't have been able to keep that in focus and the camera would not have been able to react in time. So, would I recommend you buy this lens for the R7? Well, for the type of photography I do, which is usually in lower light, and on top of that I need fast shutter speeds, and I also might not get another chance to get the shot when the wildlife shows because I'm actually out in a field in the wild, I'm inclined to say no. But if you're taking birds in the garden or from a hide, and you've plenty of time to photograph your subject and you can take many, many shots, then you'll probably not have as many issues as I do. So here's what I'd do. I would buy this lens for full frame camera if you have one. And if you already have an R7 or another APS-C crop sensor, then by all means, when you want to or you think you need to, pair the lens with it. But if I only owned an APS-C crop sensor camera, or like an R7 for example, for the type of photography I do, I wouldn't buy this lens, especially for that camera. Now, it may not be an L lens, but in my opinion, the lens is still a lot of money. And I'd argue it's a lot of money to spend and not be fully happy with its performance on an APS-C crop sensor body like the R7. Please excuse the squint. The sun is so bright and it's coming towards the end of the day, so it's coming quite low and right into my face. I am having a much more successful day with shorted owls than I have done previously, which I'm quite pleased about. I've got a few flyby shots at relatively close range that I think will hopefully come out okay. You'll get to see them pretty shortly. You probably have just heard my thoughts on the R7, and having used the R6 exclusively this afternoon, I've got to reiterate what I've just said. What a difference in terms of speed of focusing, focus tracking and accuracy. I really can't say enough how I feel that this particular 200-800mm lens is much more suited to a full frame camera than an APS-C crop sensor camera. As the shorter owls that were hunting around me have moved on, hopefully temporarily, and hopefully they'll be back, gives me the opportunity to tell you about something that I wanted to test out. So the image stabilization on this particular lens, I must say, given that it's 800mm, is absolutely fantastic. I really do think it's very, very strong. Now, that is coupled with the in-body image stabilization of the camera. But earlier on, one of the owls that was hunting decided to perch on a tree, and I thought what I would do is just film some video footage handheld without the use of a tripod at 800mm on a full frame R6 and just see how well and how stable that footage was. Now, I will say that it was shot at 120 frames per second because I don't have much time to react and change my settings. That's what happens when wildlife appears in front of you. I just went with what I had. Now, that 120 frames a second will normally smooth out some of the jerkiness that you might see perhaps with handheld footage. But even so, I think even filmed at 120 frames per second, you will get to see just how stable the footage is. Now, your results will obviously vary. You may well be someone that perhaps has steadier hands than I have, and you will get even better results. Or alternatively, you might not have such steady hands and have slightly worse results. So obviously, your mileage as such will vary. But I've certainly been very impressed with the image stabilization on this particular lens. So I'm back a week later, more or less the same spot, but not exactly where I was before. The tree that I was using last time round to shelter myself and help disguise myself against the background, unfortunately, an animal has decided to lay poo next to it. Now, I can normally work around that, but unfortunately the poo has attracted an absolute shed load of flies, which are currently buzzing all the way around it, and I just cannot deal with that at all. So, we've got to sort it out. Right, well, I've not had to wait long for a single shorted owl to be quartering. Really wasn't expecting it again out so early. We are, 1:45 in the afternoon. So I'll keep my voice down, and hopefully my piece to camera earlier on wasn't loud enough to put it off. I've managed to rattle off some shots, but not fully close and a little bit underexposed. I'd literally just got here, set up, did a piece to camera, and then having to look round, bang, shorted out. Just 2 weeks in a row where it's been out earlier than I was expecting. It's a good learning piece there. In fact, that owl noise back in the distance. Too far really for photographs at all, even for video. But I'm going to shut up and hope that it works its way closer towards me. So there's one thing about this 200-800mm lens which is really, really irritating the life out of me, and I cannot not talk about it. So it's the noise it makes. Now, I've set my camera to silent shooting, okay? And you might think, well, okay, there'll be some noise from the focusing motor, and yes, I'll accept that. But even when this lens is stationary, not focusing, just on standby mode, there's a noise from it. And there's a noise from it when I mount it to the Canon R6 and also when I mount it to the Canon R7, which leads me to believe that probably it will make a noise no matter what camera it's mounted to. Now, what is that noise? I don't know, but I think it's to do with the image stabilization. Now, I have tried turning the image stabilization off on the camera lens, but it's made absolutely no difference whatsoever, so I presume it's a noise or something to do with the in-body image stabilization on this camera, working in conjunction with the lens or not, I don't know. It's difficult to describe what the noise is like. I'm going to call it active noise cancelling white noise. So if you've ever had noise cancelling headphones that you've bought, like Bose or Sony or whatever, and you switch on the noise cancelling, it applies some sort of white noise, which you can notice in your ear, and that's exactly what this sounds like. It sounds like traffic in the background, and in fact for a good while I did think it was traffic in the background until I sort of looked around and went, there's no traffic in the background. Why am I hearing this noise? It was only when I switched off the camera that immediately that noise stopped, and I knew that that was then coming from the lens. I don't remember having this noise from any other lens combination on my Canon cameras, and I do think it's important, especially if your photography revolves around species that hunt with their hearing. For example, owls hunt with their hearing. And if you're taking it seriously enough where you're trying to perhaps disguise yourself, maybe using a bit of camo, trying to conceal yourself as best as possible, then I'd argue that that's actually quite important, and it's an important factor to note. I really don't know why the lens is so noisy. So I've spent quite a bit of time now with this lens outside, which is, incidentally is wrapped in a lens coat waterproof lens cover, because at the time of making this video I'm not aware of anyone that's actually yet produced the neoprene covers for them. If you know of someone, please drop it in the comment below and help me out. I'm desperate to pick up a cover for this lens. So I've noticed a few things that I like about the lens and a few things that I don't like about the lens, which are a bit of a miss, I think, from Canon's point of view. So I'm going to try and point those out now. So the first thing that I do like is the fact that, although you can't see it on this particular video, there are two different sized screw holes on the tripod foot here, and certainly plates like the Manfrotto plate that will allow you to use both the large and the smaller screws, and you can use both of those at the same time. There's also a hole for an alignment dial, and that makes sure that when you're carrying on moving the lens around, this tripod foot and mount is now pretty secure. There's not much danger of the two coming apart. Certainly if you've ever used something like the Sigma 150-600mm lens before in the past, you may well be as frustrated as I have been when your Arca Swiss mount starts to work its way loose from the bottom of the tripod foot, and that really is annoying. So good on Canon for providing two different size screw holes there on this particular lens. There's only one screw hole on the 100-500mm lens, which is the smaller of the two. That's something worth remembering. The next thing I like is that the tripod foot and collar, when you do rotate it round, it feels really nice and smooth, really loose. I don't know if there's ball bearings in there or not, but it feels like there might be, and it's really nice to rotate. However, the fact you can't remove this tripod foot and collar, I think, is a real miss from Canon, to be honest with you, because there are times when you might want to handhold the lens and remove this collar, and you can't, unfortunately. And what you're going to have to do is just loosen it up, as I'm doing here, swap it to the top, and deal with it that way. So, not ideal. I mean, obviously you can get by with it, but I think it's a miss from Canon. So can you handhold this lens? Yes, you can. And I'm a bit surprised at saying that, but it's not actually heavy to handhold at all. One thing I do like about this lens is, and I'm comparing this against the Sigma 150 to 600mm lens. If you've ever had that lens before fully extended, you'll know that when you're hand holding it, how much weight was on the front of the lens. So the lens would always want to really push its way down, and your arms will absolutely ache after not very long at all hand holding that lens, or at least my arms would. Maybe I need to go to the gym a bit more. On this particular lens, I don't know what the exact weights are compared to the Sigma, so I'll pop it on the screen below. Whether or not it's heavier or not, I don't know, but the weight of this lens, the bulk of the weight of this lens, is much further back towards the camera. So when you are hand holding it, it does feel a little bit more balanced than the Sigma 150 to 600mm lens is. It's certainly not as nice to use as the Canon 100 to 500mm lens from a handheld perspective, but of course the other lens is a lot smaller and a lot lighter. When you do zoom out, yes, the weight of this does change and the balance does change. It does try to become a bit more front heavy, so that's something you need to bear in mind if you've got a gimbal and you're balancing it out. When you zoom in and out, your gimbal is going to move up and down accordingly, but I don't think it's a big issue at all. Certainly fully extended, as I mentioned, that's certainly a lot lighter on the fully extended front end than I'd otherwise expect. Other things that I'm a bit frustrated about on this lens, obviously I've mentioned the zoom ring previously. I would like to see a lock function on not just this lens, but actually all Canon super telephoto lenses like this, where you can not only lock the lens permanently and not rely on the actual zoom ring itself being loose or stiff to stop lens creep, but also to lock it at the various different lengths of millimeters that are perhaps marked on the outer lens there. Certainly with the Sigma 150 to 600mm contemporary lens, you could lock that at 150, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, etc., all the way, all the different main stops of the focal range, whereas this you can't. You're just relying on that smooth and tight ring and the lens not to creep. I'd like to see that on Canon lenses if I could. Another thing that I think is missing from this lens, which ideally you'd like to see, I mean, I'm saying all this stuff, of course, but realising that this is not an L series lens and they are trying to manage costs and price points and things, but I'm just, I guess, speaking from an idealistic, ideal world perspective. The image stabilizer mode, it's either off or it's on. There is no panning modes on there. There is no 1, 2, 3, such as you get on the L series 100 to 500mm lens. So you either got image stabilizer on or off, just like your cheaper, lower end Canon lenses. And ideally, I'd like to see different image stabilizer modes as well. The autofocus switch and side of things, again, similar to the image stabilizer, there's either autofocus off or on, basically, and there's no focus limiter. So on the 100 to 500mm lens, you can limit the amount of focus to either the long end or the immediate short end of the lens, and that's quite useful if you know you're dealing with wildlife subjects that are kind of moving quite erratically, but you know they're not going to be too far away or too close. It helps the lens maintain focus without having to hunt the entire focal range of the lens. So those are a few initial comments after using the lens for a couple of days out in the field. So I'm at local nature reserve Hyde, where a couple of weeks ago I put both lenses, the 200 to 800 and the 100 to 500, in a back-to-back test against some relatively static wildlife subjects out on the lake in front of me. I didn't film at the time because this hide was absolutely full of people and I didn't want to be discourteous to those that were already in the hide. But come back today, it's a little bit quieter, so I've been able to film that bit of an intro for you. So what we'll do now is we'll hop into Lightroom, we'll have a look at those shots that I took back to back, and we'll see how the two lenses compare. Okay, I've now imported all of the photos that I've taken from the hide with both lenses of the same wildlife subjects. Just so you know, I've imported them into Lightroom, but I have not added any sharpening or development settings, so we can see them literally exactly as they were taken with the camera. I did also take some photographs with the 100 to 500mm lens with the 1.4 times teleconverter extender on there, so that you can compare that against the 200 to 800mm lens at 700mm and try and get a sense of whether you think perhaps it's worth investing in the 200 to 800mm lens if you've already got the 100 to 500. So we'll keep the 200-800mm lens on the left-hand side and the 100-500mm lens on the right-hand side. This particular shot you're seeing here is just to demonstrate the difference in focal length between 200mm and 100mm on the respective lenses, so you can get a sense of what the difference is when those lenses are fully zoomed in to give them the widest angle that they have. Various different ways to test out these lenses. What I've done is I've just kept the f-stops the same. So the 100 to 500 is f10. That is what you will get with the 1.4 times teleconverter on as a maximum aperture. And the 200 to 800mm is constantly at f9, which is its maximum aperture. So this is 200mm across both of those two lenses. Let's zoom in and see what we can find. So just having a quick look round. Realistically, I can't really see too much difference in terms of image quality, if I'm completely honest with you. It could just be my eyes, but potentially the reflections from the water are slightly better handled by the 100 to 500mm lens. It appears to cut through just slightly better. And if I'm really being super critical, I might just argue, I don't think it will come across on YouTube because of the video compression, that the 100 to 500 is ever so slightly sharper on the brown duck, but really it's almost too close to call, I'd say. So here we are at 300mm now. Let's zoom in, see what we've got. Brown duck looks more or less the same to me, to be quite honest. Notice how the ISO is actually the same in both of these instances, despite the f-stop and shutter speed remaining the same, and that's because I think the light probably varied between swapping lenses out. Looking at the feather detail on the black and white duck, I can't call it. Looks identical to me. I can't call it. Alright, here's 400mm. First of all, my apologies. You'll notice the 100 to 500mm is actually taken at 428. I did my best to try and get it bang on 400, but there's no notch on that lens to let you know when you've exactly reached that focal length. I've obviously missed it just by a little bit there, but never mind. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference in terms of this this comparison. So again, let's zoom in. Unfortunately, being wildlife, they do what they do. I haven't got the best pose on the left-hand side, but hopefully I might be able to pick up something in the feather detail. Now, I'm actually going to call it at 400mm in favour of the 200 to 800mm lens. It just looks like it's picked up a bit more feather detail to me. Again, it's just slightly, so it probably won't come across with the YouTube video compression, but I'm going to call it a bit of a surprise, the 200 to 800mm. I will just have a look at these ducks, and again, even when I look at the brown ducks on the left-hand side, I know it's not it's not looking at us, but I can see what appears to be slightly better feather detail on that brown duck, but again, very slightly. But a surprise win for the 200 to 800 on that one. Okay, so 500mm now, which is the maximum native focal range for the 100 to 500. Let's have a look. White duck, no, too close to call on the white duck. Brown duck, perhaps slightly better again on the brown duck on the left-hand side, so that's the 200 to 800. Again, bit of a surprise, but so close. That could just be, you know, down to just not nailing to focus on that one time, for example. It's tough, but yeah, just going to call it the 200 to 800mm. Again, a second win there at 500mm. Okay, so here's the teleconverter on the 100 to 500mm lens now on the right-hand side at 700mm. Now you will get f9 at the maximum aperture on the 200 to 800 versus f10 on the 100 to 500. Just bear that in mind. Let's have a look. Let's look at the white duck first. It's holding up very well with the teleconverter, the 100 to 500, I will say. I'm going to say it's too close to call on that white duck, really. Let's look at the brown duck. For me, the brown duck is clearly better detailed on the 200 to 800mm lens, possibly as a result of the teleconverter just taking an edge's sharpness off of the 100 to 500. Yeah, so another win for the 200 to 800mm lens. Now that's not a complete surprise to me, given that I'm comparing it against a teleconverter on the 100 to 500. But what is more of a surprise is that is three wins out of the comparison that I have found for the 200 to 800, which is quite a surprise to me if I'm completely honest with you. And here is just a comparison at 800mm for the 200 to 800 on the left hand side versus 700mm for the 100 to 500 with the 1.4 times teleconverter, just so you can get a sense of scale in terms of how much extra reach you're getting for that 100mm there. I'm not going to even bother zooming in to see the difference in image quality between the two, because I can already see on the left hand side that the sheer extra 100mm is providing more detail, especially on the darker brown duck. That's just sheer zoom power on the reach that is giving that benefit of extra detail there. And finally, this is just, I guess, a bit of a bonus shot here. It's taken on a completely different day, completely different location, just to demonstrate that if you really, really have to, you can pair the 200 to 800mm on an R7, and also on top of that, put on a 1.4 times teleconverter for some mega reach. This is a crane I captured at a nature reserve in southwest England. Now, would I recommend doing this? Absolutely not. The focusing is horrendously slow. I got very, very lucky. As you can see, it's a very, very bright day here, and that really just about allowed this lens to focus and come out with some semi-good shots that I could use. Now, this is an edited shot. It's had noise reduction applied to it, and it's been cropped in a bit. And if I show you some of the original shots as they were taken, and if I zoom in, you'll see, especially around the head of the bird, it's not that sharp particularly. That's a combination of atmospherics that are magnified as a result of the sheer reach. Also, the lens not really acquiring focus all that snappy because of the sheer lack of light going into it, even on a bright day. Just remember what I said earlier on about the R7 and focusing with this lens, and that I wouldn't really recommend it. You know, I've got lucky here with a couple of shots, but a lot of them I was not able to use because they have been too soft and out of focus. But zooming into the bird, you can see just how soft they are. But you know, take enough shots and hope that a few of them come out sharp is my motto. And the thing to bear in mind with all of this stuff here is that, you know, whilst what I've done here is not ideal, a 1.4 times teleconverter on that lens, on a crop sensor body for a bird in flight. However, had I have not done that, I wouldn't have got any of these shots anyway, because the bird would have just been too far away. So despite not being ideal, it's at least allowed me to capture some shots, and some shots that were sharp enough to use and sharp enough to edit. This is my favourite that I've been able to do. You can see I've applied Adobe noise reduction to that, and if I just go into the settings here, yeah, I've done various editing on masks and things like that to bring out the bird, as you can see. So it is doable, but just not recommended. Right, well, you've just seen that the 200 to 800mm lens is the sharper of the two, right? Well, not so fast, because despite the test that I did, which was impartial in relatively similar conditions, having had greater experience of these lenses rather than just that one time, and having taken quite a few shots, my view is that actually overall that 100 to 500mm is the sharper lens, and here is why. So static subjects, I'm going to argue they're both pretty much in the same ballpark, but when it comes to nailing focus on moving subjects or fast moving subjects, that's where the 100 to 500 has the advantage. First of all, because it focuses faster in the first place, but also because it nails the focus more often, so your hit rate is greater. So overall, despite my test there indicating that the 200 to 800 is probably sharper, in a real world long-term usage, I'd say with your moving subjects, you're probably going to be better off with the 100 to 500 in my experience. So in summary, should you buy the RF 200 to 800mm lens? Well, it depends. First of all, There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's a great lens. As is the 100-500mm, that's also a great lens. But here's what I'd do. If you're looking to buy your first wildlife super telephoto zoom lens, I'd actually buy the 100-500mm if you can. And I realise it's a little bit more expensive, but with that you're getting a much smaller, neater, nimble package with faster focusing, so your keeper rate will increase over the 200-800mm. For the majority of use cases, I think the 100-500mm will be fine, especially if you pair that with a teleconverter for almost no loss in photo quality. There is some, but not that much. With less of a footprint swinging around, you'll also find that wildlife will be less distracted, and you'll also be able to get closer to your subjects and won't put them off quite as much. If you own a crop sensor camera, such as the Canon R7, the R50, R100, or the R10 I should say, personally I wouldn't buy this lens for those cameras. I think you're better off again going to the 100-500mm lens. I just feel that this lens, for the reasons I've already said, much more suited to a full frame camera. Yeah, you can get it to work absolutely fine, as I have proved, but I think that you will miss far more shots than you think you might otherwise, and could end up being a little bit disappointed. And I'd argue that that's a lot of money to spend to be disappointed. If you already own a crop sensor camera and you're buying this lens for a full frame camera, then yes, by all means pair it with your crop sensor camera. I'm just saying I wouldn't buy it specifically for a crop sensor camera if that was the only camera that you owned. Is this a good buy for a full frame camera? Well, yes, I think it is. I would still make sure that the 100-500 is my first lens, but I would add this, as I have done, as a secondary lens. One of the common questions is, can you get away with using the 100-500mm lens with a teleconverter instead of using the 200-800mm? And yes, I think that's an absolutely viable option. But there are also going to be times when you just need that extra reach sometimes. And don't forget, you can still put a teleconverter on top of this for yet even more reach. Now I know, of course, there are compromises. There are compromises with atmospherics, haze, and all that sort of poor quality air being magnified on days when the air quality isn't perhaps as perfect as we'd like for photography, but you can certainly work around that. So in summary, both are great lenses. There are no bad choices here. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you very much for watching, if you've made it this far. I also have 3 requests, if I may. The first is, if you've found this video useful or learned anything from it, please would you just hit that like button. It will help my channel out immensely for the content that I produce for you. The second is, I do other photography gear reviews and vlogs. If you'd like to see more of those or more of this sort of style of content, then please consider subscribing as well. And the third thing is actually for yourselves. Now, you've heard my thoughts here. Now, if this is the first video that you've watched on this particular lens to try and help you make the purchasing decision, do yourself a favor, go and watch maybe 2 to 3 other videos on the lens so you can get a better balanced, impartial view, because at the end of the day, all anyone is going to do is give you their own opinions. Take my opinions, go and find someone else and take their opinions, come to a condensed, balanced view, and then decide on what lens is right for you. That's it from me. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll see you next time. Cheers.